Picture a man alone in a suite at the Hotel Elysee.
Right, in New York City.
Exactly, New York City. The year is 1983. He's 71 years old, and he's found dead.
Which is tragic enough on its own.
Right, but the initial report from the medical examiner claims he choked on the plastic cap of an eye drop bottle.
Just a bizarre, almost absurd end.
Totally. But months later, the truth actually comes out. He was using that plastic cap to ingest a lethal, toxic level of barbiturates.
Yeah.
And if that isn't tragic enough, this man had explicitly written in his will that he wanted to be buried at sea.
A very specific request.
Very specific. But instead, his estranged brother literally hijacks his body. He hauls him back to the very city he spent his entire life running from and buries him right next to the mother who had, frankly, smothered him.
It's honestly a staggering betrayal.
It really is. And for those listening, you are looking at the final act of Tennessee Williams.
The legendary playwright.
Right. So we are going on a deep dive today into the comprehensive biographical source material on one of the greatest playwrights in history.
And it's a fascinating life to look at.
It is. The mission for this deep dive is to explore how his profound personal traumas and a deeply dysfunctional family didn't just casually influence his writing.
No, not at all.
They literally became the foundation of modern 20th century American theater.
The irony of that burial you mentioned, it just perfectly encapsulates the central tension of his entire existence.
How so?
Well, when we look at the pillars of American drama, Williams is universally placed right alongside Arthur Miller and Eugene O'Neill.
Right, the absolute greats.
Exactly. But his journey to that pinnacle wasn't born out of, quiet academic study or just a general love of literature. It was forged in the absolute extreme emotional fire.
Yeah, the sources make that very clear.
They do.
Yeah.
Every piece of source material we have points to a life where the line between reality and the stage simply did not exist. I mean, he didn't invent his masterpieces.
He survived them.
Perfectly said.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we actually have to start before the name Tennessee even existed.
Right. His given name.
Yeah, he was born Thomas Lanier Williams III back in 1911 in Columbus, Mississippi.
Deep in the South.
Very deep South. And to understand how he eventually creates these defining works, what we now call Southern Gothic masterpieces, that deeply atmospheric, decaying, darkly romantic style, we really have to look at the crucible of his childhood.
It was incredibly intense.
It was a pressure cooker. You have a marriage that is fundamentally toxic. His mother, Edwina, was the daughter of an Episcopal priest.
So she had that very strict background.
Exactly. She represented this rigid, puritanical, genteel Southern upbringing.
Very concerned with appearances.
Yes, exactly. And then you have his father, Cornelius, or C.C. Williams. He's a traveling shoe salesman from a line of East Tennessee pioneers.
Almost the exact opposite of his wife.
Night and day. He was prone to heavy drinking and, unfortunately, using his fists.
Right. Put those two personalities in a room, and the collateral damage is inevitable.
Yeah, a total disaster.
And young Thomas became the focal point of that damage, especially when he contracted a severe case of diphtheria as a child.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that was a deadly disease back then.
It was. He nearly dies from it. And the illness leaves him so incredibly frail that he is virtually confined to his house for an entire year to recuperate.
An entire year.
Just stuck inside. Imagine being a child, isolated from the world, trapped in a house where the walls are constantly vibrating with your parents' mutual hatred.
And his father's reaction to this illness is just brutal, right?
That's awful.
Instead of sympathy, C.C. Williams looks at his frail, bedridden son with absolute disdain.
Because Cece was this hyper-masculine figure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He despised what he viewed as his son's effeminacy. So you have a father who actively rejects him.
Which is heartbreaking.
It is. And on the other side, a mother who is trapped in a miserable marriage and decides to focus entirely on her fragile young son. She just smothers him with a suffocating level of attention.
That dynamic is really the psychological engine of his entire career.
The push and pull of it.
Yeah. And the instability only accelerates when Thomas is 8. His father is promoted to the home office of the International Shoe Company.
Right, in St. Louis.
Yes, they moved to St. Louis. And because of the father's loud, turbulent behavior and rampant alcoholism, the mother is deeply embarrassed.
Of course she is, with her genteel background.
Right. So she is constantly uprooting the family, just moving them from house to house around St.
They're
Louis.
constantly unsettled.
Exactly. She's desperately searching for a respectable environment that, frankly, they can't afford, and that her husband will inevitably ruin anyway.
You look at this setup, and it's like His childhood home was a literal pressure cooker, but someone had broken the release valve.
That's a great way to put it.
Think about it from his perspective. The heat is constantly rising, the father's terrifying rage, the mother's frantic, smothering anxiety, his own physical frailty.
Too much for a kid.
Way too much. And the only way to keep his own mind from exploding was to channel that pressurized steam into creating fictional worlds.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see exactly why writing wasn't just like a creative outlet for him.
It was more than a hobby.
It was a strict psychological necessity. His desire to break free from this puritanical, abusive upbringing propelled him toward the typewriter. It was his sole survival mechanism.
Wow.
When the physical world around you is terrifying and entirely out of your control, the natural human defense mechanism is to build a world where you get to dictate the terms.
He had to write.
He wrote because the alternative was losing his mind.
But that mental sanctuary is eventually violently invaded.
Yeah, reality comes knocking.
It does. He tries to go to college at the University of Missouri to study journalism, but he ends up failing a military training course in his junior year.
ROTC, I believe.
Right. And his father, who already resents him deeply, just uses this as an excuse to snap the trap shut.
He pulls him right out.
He pulls Thomas out of school entirely and forces him into the very physical, hypermasculine world he had always been terrified of.
The factory.
A 9-to-5 job at the International Shoe Company factory.
Dropping a highly sensitive, poetically minded young man onto a loud, grinding factory floor. I mean, it's essentially a psychological prison sentence.
Oh, absolutely.
C.C. Williams was actively trying to crush the writer out of his son by breaking his spirit with manual labor.
Wait, I have to push back on this narrative for a second.
Sure.
If he hated his dad's world so much, and he was already writing and trying to win literary contests, which the sources say he was doing, why did he submit to working in the shoe factory at all?
It's a fair question.
Like, why didn't he just run away or refuse?
You really have to view this through the lens of the 1930s. The Great Depression was in full swing.
Oh, right, the timing.
Yeah, jobs were scarce, poverty was a very real existential threat, and the economic and psychological control his family exerted over him was absolute.
He had no safety net.
None at all. Running away wasn't a romantic adventure back then, it was a death sentence.
That makes sense.
But more importantly, for American theater, this painful detour was a critical mechanism for his development.
How so?
It stripped away his genteel, puritanical shielding. The factory forced him to observe raw, gritty, unpolished human behavior up close.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah. The source material notes that a specific coworker he met on that factory floor possessed a brutish, unapologetic animal magnetism that a sheltered kid like Thomas had never seen before.
Wait, are you saying?
That random factory worker directly inspired the character of Stanley Kowalski.
That is a staggering realization.
It really is.
The exact punishment his father designed to destroy his writing actually handed him the blueprint for one of the most iconic characters in literary history.
You couldn't write a better irony.
But the physical toll of that environment was enormous, right? He hated the monotony of the factory so viscerally that it drove him to a punishing, almost manic routine.
He burned the candle at both ends.
Exactly. He would work all day on the factory floor and then come home and type furiously every weekend and late into the night.
It's just relentless.
His mother recalled hearing the typewriter clicking away in the dark, silent house. She would come in to wake him up for his factory shift and find him sprawled across the bed, fully dressed,
Completely exhausted.
completely passed out from exhaustion, surviving entirely on black coffee and cigarettes.
The human nervous system simply cannot sustain that kind of friction.
No, it can't.
And it didn't. By the time he is 24 years old, the collision between his exhausting daytime reality and his frantic nighttime escapism leads to a complete physiological and mental breakdown.
His body literally forces him to leave the job.
It just shut down.
And it's only after he recovers from this breakdown and finally finishes his degree at the University of Iowa that he makes a profound severing of his identity.
He changes his name.
Right. Thomas Lanier Williams III disappears. He adopts the professional name Tennessee.
Which is so interesting.
The sources note it was an acknowledgement of his Southern accent and, ironically, his abusive father's East Tennessee pioneer roots.
Claiming the name of the region that produced his tormentor is a fascinating psychological reclamation.
It's like taking the power back.
He is absolutely taking ownership of the trauma. But, while the shoe factory provided the raw masculinity of Stanley Kowalski,
Right.
It was the family members suffocating him back in St. Louis that provided the intricate blueprint for his most devastating work.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the explosive, life-changing success he experiences in the 1940s and 50s is built on a foundation of profound guilt.
Deep, deep guilt.
We all know the fragile, heartbreaking characters in his plays, but what's staggering is realizing you're essentially watching a documentary of his older sister, Rose.
Rose is the emotional anchor of his entire existence.
She really was.
She was diagnosed with schizophrenia as a young woman, and in 1943, as her behavior became increasingly erratic and disturbing to their mother's sense of propriety, frankly, the family authorized a lobotomy.
Just brutal.
It was. This procedure didn't cure her, it destroyed her. It left her permanently incapacitated, stripping away her personality and requiring her to be institutionalized for the rest of her life.
Let the horror of that sit for a moment. His sister's mind is surgically destroyed just as his own mind is beginning to conquer Broadway.
The timing is haunting.
The guilt he felt over not being able to protect Rose, it just seeps into every word he writes. Look at the mechanisms of his plays. In The Glass Menagerie, the delicate, withdrawn character of Laura isn't just inspired by Rose. It is Rose.
Unmistakably.
And the domineering, suffocating Amanda is Edwina.
The mother.
Right. And Tom, the son who abandons them to save himself, is literally Tennessee Williams confessing his own survivor's guilt to the audience.
The parallels only grow more explicit from there. When you watch the devastating mental unraveling of Blanche Dubois in Streetcar,
oh, yeah.
you are watching his worst nightmare regarding Rose's decline played out in real time.
It's right there on the page.
Later, in his play, Suddenly, last summer, he explicitly uses the threat of a lobotomy as a central, terrifying motif. He is constantly dissecting this singular family tragedy from different angles.
It's like his plays were live exposure therapy.
That's exactly what it was.
He wasn't inventing fiction.
Yeah.
He was dragging his family's deepest, darkest trauma onto a Broadway stage, night after night, forcing the whole world to look at it.
And paying the price for it emotionally.
Yeah. And the incredibly dark paradox here is that he used the trauma of his sister's destruction to write the masterpieces that made him wildly wealthy.
Right.
And he then used that wealth to move Rose to a private institution. He actually gave her a percentage of his royalties to pay for her lifelong care.
He funded her survival with the stories of her demise.
That's just chilling.
Legendary director Elia Kazan perfectly diagnosed this lack of boundary. He said, everything in his life is in his place, and everything in his plays is in his life. But performing this exposure therapy didn't heal him. It kept the wounds open. Because of that constant proximity to his own pain, Williams couldn't sit still.
He was always moving.
He lived entirely out of suitcases, moving frantically between New York, New Orleans, Key West, Rome. He explicitly wrote that he needed constant radical change just to arrest the downward drag of his spirit.
But geography couldn't cure the terrifying fear hovering over his shoulder.
No, you can't outrun your own mind.
He lived with the absolute certainty that the madness that claimed Rose was genetic and that it would eventually claim him too.
A very real fear for him.
So, with that specter of institutionalization haunting him, he sought an anchor. He needed someone to tether him to reality, which leads to a desperate search for stability through romance.
His exploration of his homosexuality in the late 1930s and 40s was marked by intense passion, but also intense tragedy.
Yeah, lots of heartbreak.
He joined social circles in New York and Provincetown, but his early loves ended disastrously. Like in 1940, he fell deeply for a young dancer named Kip Kiernan.
And what happened there?
Kiernan eventually left him to marry a woman, and then died just 4 years later at the age of 26.
Oh, wow.
That kind of sudden loss reinforces his belief that anything he loves will be taken from him.
So when he eventually meets Frank Merlot in New York, the dynamic shifts completely.
It's a totally different kind of relationship.
Right. Merlot was an occasional actor of Sicilian descent, a former U.S. Navy man who had served in World War II. He wasn't another tortured artist, he was grounded.
He was a rock.
And for 14 years, he becomes the enduring, stable center of Williams's chaotic life.
Merlot essentially constructed a protective bubble around the playwright. He became his personal secretary, managing all the mundane details of their domestic life in Manhattan and Key West.
Taking care of the real world so Williams could write.
Exactly. Merlot acted as a crucial ballast to Williams's frequent bouts of depression and paranoia. It is no coincidence that the 14 years he spent with Merlot were, without a doubt, the most critically and commercially productive years of his career.
But the protective bubble eventually bursts. Infidelities and drug abuse on both sides fracture the relationship.
It falls apart.
And then, shortly after they separate, Merlot is diagnosed with inoperable lung cancer.
Such a tragic turn.
Williams returns to care for him, but Merlot dies in September of 1963. And this loss is the catalyst for a catastrophic tailspin.
The anchor is gone.
Completely gone.
Yeah.
Williams descends into a nearly catatonic depression, and to climb out of it, he turns to Dr. Max Jacobson.
Oh boy.
Yeah, infamously known as Dr. Feelgood.
Dr. Jacobson begins injecting Williams with massive increasing amounts of amphetamines to combat the depression.
Which has terrible side effects.
Right. Amphetamines cause severe insomnia and paranoia, so Williams starts combining them with heavy prescriptions of the sedative Seconal just to force his body to sleep.
It feels like creative geniuses are always waiting for the other shoe to drop.
It's a common trope.
Did Williams subconsciously sabotage his own stability with Merlot because he was addicted to the chaos that fueled his early writing? Or was this severe chemical dependency just a tragic, unavoidable byproduct of losing his only anchor?
What's fascinating here is how the chemistry of his addiction directly answers that question by destroying his writing.
Really? How so?
The sabotage wasn't intentional, it was mechanical. Amphetamines create a false sense of brilliance. They make you type incredibly fast, producing reams of pages, but they strip away nuance.
You lose the subtlety.
Exactly. And barbiturates, on the other hand, kill anxiety, but they also kill empathy. You cannot write a deeply empathetic, fragile character like Blanche Dubois when your emotional receptors are chemically numbed. The raw nerve he needed to write was gone.
And his professional output immediately reflects this. The 1960s and 70s become an era of brutal theatrical failures.
Flop after flop.
Plays like Kingdom of Earth and Vieux Carré just bomb at the box office. He's in and out of treatment facilities, sometimes involuntarily committed by his own mother and his estranged brother, Duncan.
The family steps back in.
Yeah. And his later relationship with Robert Carroll, a young Vietnam veteran struggling with his own severe addictions, only amplified this destructive loop.
It was a very dark time.
Carroll played on Williams's acute loneliness and his deep fear of aging as a gay man.
The tragedy of his final decades is that he was still typing furiously, trapped in the physical habit of writing, but the emotional truth had been short-circuited by the pills.
Which brings us back to that jarring visual we started with. The hotel room in 1983.
Yes, the end.
The tragic, drug-fueled unraveling ends in a way that feels like a rejected scene from a dark comedy.
Found dead at 71 in the Hotel Elysée. The ultimate irony of surviving a lifetime of profound emotional torment only to accidentally ingest a lethal amount of secobarbital using the plastic cap of an eye drop bottle.
But the true violation happens after his heart stops beating. Let's look at the mechanics of this betrayal.
It's hard to stomach.
11 years before he died, Williams wrote out a highly specific will. He explicitly stated that he wanted to be sewn into a canvas sack and dropped into the Caribbean Sea.
As close as possible to the spot where his literary idol, the poet Hart Crane, had drowned himself.
Exactly.
Think about the symbolism of that request. After a life characterized by suffocating family ties and the heavy, decaying earth of the South, he wanted to be given to the sea fluid, unanchored, finally out of reach.
But his brother, Dickon Williams, steps in. This is the brother he was entirely estranged from, who had previously tried to control his medical treasons.
Right.
Dakin completely ignores the legal will. He arranges for Tennessee Williams to be transported to St. Louis. He buries him in Calvary Cemetery.
Back in the dirt.
He pins him into the dirt of the very city he spent his entire youth trying to escape and drops him in the ground right next to the mother whose smothering grip he had spent a lifetime running from.
So what does this all mean?
It means that the gravitational pull of family trauma is sometimes inescapable.
It's terrifying. The tragic poetry here is immense. Here is a man who monetized his family's dysfunction, who spent every ounce of his genius trying to write his way out of their grasp, and in the end, his brother ensured the family swallowed him whole anyway.
It's like a rogue editor taking a writer's brilliant, lifelong magnum opus, ripping out the final chapter and rewriting the ending without permission.
That's a perfect analogy.
Dakin forces a physical reunion that Tennessee spent his entire life avoiding. It is the ultimate violation of a storyteller's autonomy.
It strips away the illusion that success or fame can ever truly sever us from our roots. His family shaped him, they broke him, they provided the raw material for his genius, and ultimately they reclaimed him.
So for you listening, the next time you sit in a dark theater and hear that primal scream of Stella,
Mhm.
or watch the fragile glass animal shatter on stage, you now know the immense, heartbreaking human cost behind those stories.
It wasn't just fiction.
It wasn't just a brilliant imagination at work, it was survival. It was a man frantically building fictional worlds to keep from being crushed by his real one.
Which leaves us with a lingering, unresolved question to ponder long after the stage goes dark. We know he used his family's darkest moments as his source material.
We do.
But did the act of turning his mother, his sister Rose, and his own traumas into immortal characters actually save Tennessee Williams' sanity?
Mm.
Or, by putting them under the stage lights, did he permanently trap himself in a continuous loop of his own pain, condemned to watch his family's tragedy performed night after night, unable to ever truly look away?
Because for him, the curtain never really dropped. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.